Hi guys, thanks for checking out my new tutorial. My name is Fiona and I'm a home baker. I'm going to show you how to make the easiest, most delicious sourdough bread. It's rich in flavor with light and tender crumbs. So, in order to make a sourdough bread, you need a sourdough starter. I have a tutorial of how to make your own starter from the beginning to the end with all the little tricks that go with it. Or you can ask around and see if anybody has a sourdough starter they can give you. So to make our starter for the bread, we need a big jar, 1 cup of lukewarm water, and 1 cup of flour, and about 2 tablespoons of sourdough starter. It is very important that our sourdough starter is bubbly and active at this stage. I will tell you what an active starter looks like in a minute. So mix everything together and give it a good whisk. Here I want to have a consistency of a pancake batter. Cover it up and leave it on your kitchen counter. I usually leave it overnight and start baking in the morning. Now, if it's a warm day, your starter can be ready to use anywhere from 3 to 6 hours. Okay, it's morning time and my starter is ready. So there are a couple of things that I'm looking for here. It should have doubled its size. Do you see all the air bubbles in there? It's super active. It has a sweet smell to it when you smell it, and it should feel nice and airy. Now, it is very important if your starter is not as active as what you're looking at right now, you need to feed it again. You have to make your starter very strong to get a good rise on your bread. Okay, now that we have our starter going, we're going to make our bread. So I like to put everything in a large bowl. I put my bowl on the scale and I measure everything in grams. So here I have my water and I need about 200 grams of the starter. Now here's another test for you to see if your starter is ready. It it's the floating test. You see how it's floating in the water? That's another sign that it's ready. So both factors have to be true. Your starter has to be doubled in size and it has to float in water to have a successful rise. Set your scale to 0 and add the flour. Here I'm adding 200 grams of whole wheat flour with 800 grams of all-purpose flour. This recipe also works with 100% all-purpose flour. I know some of you prefer only white flour. The flavors might be a little different, so I do encourage you to play around with the flour ratio. See what tastes good to you. Simply mix everything roughly together with your hands or a dough mixer. So the dough does not really need to be smooth in this step. It just needs to be mixed. You will notice that the dough is sticky at this point. It's okay. The dough should never feel stiff or crusty. If it does, add a spoonful of water. At the same time, it should not be runny. If it is, add a spoonful of flour. So this is pretty much all the kneading that I need to do. What I'm going to do, I'm going to cover it up with a kitchen towel and let it sit on my kitchen counter for about 30 minutes to 1 hour. I'm giving my dough a chance to hydrate before I add the salt and the water. My dough looks nice and hydrated. I'm going to add my salt and water. Here I'm using pink salt, but use any kind of salt that you have. So I have to make sure all the salt water is incorporated inside the dough. So I'm pinching the water and the salt in the dough, making sure that it's all incorporated. Once you feel like it's all incorporated, start folding it into itself. So I do this fold about 15 to 20 times. If you notice, my dough is becoming more elastic and smooth. So this is all the kneading that you have to do for this sourdough bread. Cover it up with a kitchen towel and let it sit for another half an hour. For the next hour and a half, I'm going to be doing 3 turns, and this is one turn. A turn is folding the dough into itself about 4 to 5 times, covering it up, letting it rest for 30 minutes, and then I'll do another turn. So total of 3 turns. This is a very important step because we're developing flavor for our bread. I usually make my hand a little bit wet before I do the turn. It just helps me handle the dough better. Now, if you notice, this is my third turn. The dough is a lot more airier and I'm being very gentle when I'm doing my turns. Okay, I'm done with all the turns and I'm going to cover up my dough and I'm going to rest it in the fridge for about 10 to 12 hours. So here my dough is going through the first fermentation in the fridge. So it's been about 11 hours and my dough has been resting in the fridge. As you can see, it's a lot more airier. It's got some big air pockets and you see the bubbles right there, little ones, big ones. So at this stage, your dough should have risen about 20 to 30%. It shouldn't feel firm. It should feel nice and airy. Now, if you feel like it hasn't reached that point, then it needs more time to fermentate. So what you do, you basically cover it with the kitchen towel and let it sit on the kitchen counter for 1 more hour and check back on it. Now gently peel off the dough on the surface and do you see how it's holding its shape so nicely? That means my dough, it's fermented beautifully. Now if it doesn't hold its shape this well, that means it still needs more time. So you shape it and you let it rest for another hour. So here I'm shaping my dough and in this case my dough is ready. It doesn't need to rest for another hour. I'm going to sprinkle a little flour on top of it and let it rest for 20 minutes. We've been working the dough, we just need it to rest before we shape it and put it in the proving basket. It is difficult to give you an exact time of when your dough is ready to be shaped. So get a feel of it. I'm giving you a few basic steps, pointers to look for, but really at the end of the day, it's how your dough feels to you. So be patient, be persistent, and observe your dough every time you're making bread. My dough has rested for 20 minutes now and I'm ready to shape it. So if you don't have a proving basket, just use a nice big bowl and I'm going to show you both ways how to do it in a proving basket and in a bowl. Here I'm going to make a seeded crust sourdough bread. I sprinkled just a little bit flour, not too much, and then here I'm using a combination of sunflower seed and sesame seed. Feel free to use any combination you like. Flax seed, poppy seed, all these seeds work really fine. I'm going to make this one into a plain crust. Just make sure you flour your towel really generously because I don't want the dough to get stuck to the towel while it's proofing. I'm going to show you a really simple way of how to shape your dough. So flip your dough over with a bench scraper and gently pull it on each side and fold it like a book. So I'm going to fold it back again. So what I'm doing here, I am creating tension for my crust. So very gently with your fingers, just go under the dough and turn it, under and turn. So when you touch it, there is tension in the dough. This is going to ensure me that I'm going to have a beautiful crust. Flip it over and put it in the basket. And don't forget to sprinkle some flour. Cover it up with the kitchen towel and tuck it away. I'm going to shape this one with a bench scraper. So again, pull your dough very gently and fold it like a book. Now, if you find that the dough is sticking to your hand or it's hard to handle, just make your hand a little bit wet and work your dough. So as you can see, I'm like scraping under with a bench scraper, trying to seal every little opening. What I'm doing here, I'm creating tension in my dough. You see, there's even little air pockets. And the dough feels nice and firm to touch. Gently pick it up and flip it into the basket. Sprinkle the rest of the seeds on the side and on the top. Make sure you cover the whole surface area. I do like a lot of seeds. Cover it up with the kitchen towel and tuck it away. So this is my final proofing step, where I'll put my dough in the fridge for about 10 to 12 hours. Sometimes you can get away if you're running late for up to 14 hours. So when I take my bread out of the fridge, I usually let it sit in the proving basket for about 40 minutes. That's when I have my oven on and it's preheating. So I carefully flip it over onto a parchment paper, and I'm scoring my bread here with a sharp knife because it's a seeded bread. It's just much easier to use a knife. Make sure when you're scoring your bread, you score nice and deep. You can also get really creative with scoring and make different kind of designs. Now here's my other bread. You see it's sticking to the towel a little bit, so be patient, just peel it off very carefully. The top looks a little wet and I want to do some scoring, so I'm going to put some flour on top of it. That helps me with the scoring. So scoring your bread could be really fun. It's a decorative move, and also it does give your bread room to expand, and you avoid those big air pockets in your bread. So before baking your bread, make sure your oven is preheated at 500 for about 30 to 40 minutes. I want my pots to be super hot. That's going to give me a beautiful initial rise in my bread. So here I'm using a bread challenger, cast iron, which I love using. Or if you have a cast iron like Le Creuset or anything that has a top on it, use that as well. That works beautifully. Put the lids back on and reduce the heat to 450 and bake for 20 minutes. So after 20 minutes, take the lids off and your bread should have done all the rising that it needs to do. Do you see how beautiful that looks? Now I'm going to let it brown for another 20 minutes without the top on. If you like to have a darker crust, just bake it for another 3 to 5 minutes. Make sure your bread is cooled down on a wire rack before you cut into it. You never want to cut into a hot bread. And that's it. I hope you did enjoy this video. Just remember, a large part of the fun of baking sourdough is reading the dough by sight and touch and understanding its behavior. So be patient, be observant, and persistent with your bread making. And I promise you, you're going to have the best sourdough bread. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, don't forget to subscribe and give me a thumbs up. Be sure to check out my Instagram for some beautiful pasta making along with some delicious recipes.